You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. Now, during these last few weeks of session, groups from all over Illinois are making their final pushes for their budget priorities to make it into that final draft. Joining us now is a member of one of those organizations. It's the Illinois Association for Rehabilitation Facilities. Josh Evans, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here. I appreciate it.
You have spent the past few months, you've spent the past few years pushing for a pay raise for direct support professionals. These are the people that staff, that own, that run group homes for people, maybe people with disabilities, people that need assistance in their everyday lives. What is the exact ask right now? What are you trying to get into this final budget?
So what we are trying to accomplish is a number one priority of a rate study that was published in 2020. And the number one priority of that rate study is to ensure that we have a direct support professional wage rate of at least 150% of the statewide, regional, or local minimum wage. We're at about 139% right now, but with the statewide minimum wage going up to $15 next January, we've got a request to the General Assembly this year to increase that rate by $3 an hour.
So when we're talking about that study that was published and reaching this benchmark, do you feel like this would make big waves in helping hire more people for these facilities, helping staff them further? What benefits does this bring if that jump, beyond just the workers themselves, having some more take-home pay?
Absolutely. So year over year, the number one challenge that we face in providing supports to folks currently in service and to expand services is staffing. It's recruiting and retaining direct support professionals. These are individuals that have over 120 hours of classroom and on-the-job training that are directly engaged on a daily basis with children and adults with developmental disabilities. And so due to previous work by the administration and the General Assembly, we've seen some significant progress being made on recruitment and retention. And as a matter of fact, just this spring, we've been able to report to members of the General Assembly that providers, 60% of our members have reported increases in retention and recruitment. We've seen the average and starting pay increase substantially. And that's the goal. I mean, we have information, that you can see a direct correlation between compensation and increases in recruitment and retention. So what we're trying to do with this budget year is to ensure that we can keep that going, that we can get to a point where our providers have zero vacancies, that they're reducing their turnover. Because if we can do that, we can guarantee a higher quality of care, and we can expand services and supports to individuals on our waiting list. So that's a big part of what the goal is here.
You mentioned the momentum that's there right now, and we've heard so much this year. It's a tight budget year. There's not enough. There's not as much money to go around as there has been in previous years. What has it been like negotiating for this final push that you're looking for compared to previous years where you have seen that incremental progress, I guess? What has it been like in the negotiating rooms this year?
Sure. Well, we knew, we try to, as an association, pay attention to the revenue projections and what's coming federally and what's on the state side. So in a lot of the conversations we have with our members, it's about letting them know the environment that we're going to be advocating in. And so, we had an awareness that the FY25 budget could be tightening compared to previous year budgets. And when the governor offered his introduced budget in February, there was not a proposed increase to the DSP wage rate, and there had been introduced budgets in the past few years. And first of all, I want to recognize, the administration has been a strong supporter and a leader in the social services space. But that certainly set us back, I think. It was troubling to be in a situation where we had to come to the General Assembly without sort of that leg up in the advocacy process. So our goals from January all the way up to this point is for our members to relate the personal stories, share their data on their recruitment and retention, and basically urge the General Assembly to say that this is not the year to take a year off, so to speak, in investing in services and supports, because we don't want to go back to where we were in the pre-2008 era where there were flat budgets, and we saw what that did to recruitment and retention. So it's been challenging. But the good news is I think on a bipartisan basis in both chambers, there are a lot of legislators that understand these issues, that understand the workforce demographics and want to continue to champion this issue. So I believe we've made headway. We may not end up where we hope to be, and we understand that budget negotiations are fluid, but I think due to the statewide advocacy and the bipartisan support, my hope is that this final budget will recognize the need to continue to invest in in
You mentioned
wages.
stagnant budgets, and I wonder, in the 2008 era, I believe you had said there, what happens when that momentum stops?
We went on
What's
like
negative to pausing raises?
we were on about a 10-year 2008 to 2018 run due to a number of factors where it was essentially flat funding. And as you guys know, I mean, we're in an era of higher inflation in this state and in this country, but the cost of providing services go up. No matter what, typically. And we've had time frames in which the minimum wage had gone up, but there were no increases to rates and reimbursements. Services for adults with developmental disabilities are largely contingent on what the state funds. They're the primary payer of services and supports. And so when you have flat funding, these providers can't compete with other private industries that may have similar education or training requirements of DSPs that can offer higher wages because they can adjust their price points and we can't. So in order for us to remain competitive, that is why we're trying to get at least 150% of the minimum wage, because we believe if we can get there, we can continue to offer competitive wages and benefits. So we don't want to go back to that time. And in order to not go back to that time of flat funding, we've got to have these continual increases from the General Assembly. And I think that's largely understood. And my goal, or my hope is that the FY25 budget's going to acknowledge that.
We've been talking about the slow increases in wages that we've seen over the past few years for DSPs, but there's another aspect to this kind of funding. There's another aspect to that study you had already mentioned, and it's often something we hear from Republicans especially, about their criticisms of the budget proposals not meeting the investment that is advised in that Guidehouse study. And I wonder, when we're talking about the way the state has supported and maybe not supported this industry as much, do you feel like this administration is prioritizing or at least doing what it can for the field, for this entire field, not just the workers in the facilities, but the people they're taking care of as well?
So that's a great question. I think what is understood broadly in the disability community writ large, service providers, staff, persons receiving services and families, is that Governor Pritzker and his administration, since he first came in, has prioritized rebuilding the social safety net. Not just disability services, but mental health services, the social safety net writ large. And you've seen that reflected in just about every introduced budget that he's introduced and budget that he's signed. Now, along the way, there are going to be disagreements on the scope of those investments, and sometimes we have that with the administration. The rate study that you referenced outlaid a 5-year time frame under which about 10 priorities would be fully funded by the General Assembly. And the administration is operating under a different timeline. They're operating under about a 7-year timeline, and we don't necessarily agree with that. We wanted that rate study funded in the first year, but we understand it's hard to address the challenges and the sins of the past in one individual fiscal year. So a shorter answer would be, there's no question the administration has led in rebuilding the social safety net and including developmental disabilities. And the General Assembly has done their best with the resources and priorities they're managing to try to show leadership in that space too. So yes, they have been a leader. We don't always agree on the scope of those investments, but yeah, I think it's fair, completely fair and true to say that the administration has been a leader, as has the General Assembly writ large.
Well, Josh Evans with IARF, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for your time, I appreciate it.
We'll be right back.